Okay, I am going to go ahead and get started with this evening's presentation. Thank you for coming. Tonight, we're going to talk about understanding your child's individualized education program, which is known as an IEP. I will be presenting today, and my name is Candace Kakowski. I am a speech and language pathologist at A2 Therapy Works. I have a master's degree in communication sciences and disorders from Eastern Michigan University. I also have training in advocacy from the Leaders in Policy and Advocacy through the ARC of Michigan. I'm a former executive team member of the Ann Arbor Parent Advisory Committee for Special Education, and I have 2 children who have IEPs in the public schools. So that's my background. Tonight, we're going to be talking about 4 different topics. The first one is special education law, so you can get a background about the laws that govern special education. We'll talk about acronyms, which are the alphabet soup of letters that they just throw at you sometimes, and I want you to be able to understand those when you go to meetings. We're going to talk about the parts of the IEP and advocacy tips. So let's get started. Federal law. Prior to 1973, students were just plain excluded from the school system. So it was a shame. A lot of them were institutionalized or in other ways just kept at home where they were not able to access an education like everyone else in the United States. In 1973 came the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and that said that schools who received public funding could not discriminate on the basis of disability, so they had to include. And then in 1975 came the legislation telling how those kids were going to be included. So 1973 said they must be included. 1975 was the guidance about how they were going to be included. And that was called the Education of All Handicapped Students Act of 1975, which was renamed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. So that would be if you're going to remember one thing from this slide, remember IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that is the federal law governing special education. Okay. IDEA in the news. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was upheld unanimously by the Supreme Court in a case called Andrew F. versus the Douglas County School District. And in that, they determined that students with disabilities must make progress. So minimal or de minimis educational progress is not something that is permitted in the United States. And Chief Justice Roberts wrote in his review that a student offered an educational program providing merely more than de minimis progress from year to year can hardly be said to have been offered an education at all. So I think that's a pretty strong endorsement of federal educational law.
What do you normally get instead of your
We also have Michigan law, the Michigan Mandatory Special Education Act, which actually has a little bit more safeguards and strengthens IDEA. And it says that students with disabilities must reach their maximum potential. And it also expanded special education in Michigan to cover birth to age 26. So it expanded the upper age that was covered by special education in Michigan. So that's everything I have about the law. Are there any questions about the law? No?
Candace, before you continue, I am just going to ask everyone to take a minute to make sure that they're muted on their end, just to make sure there's not any background noise coming from anybody else's computer. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Okay. All right, so we have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and what does it mandate? It mandates a free and appropriate public education. So that means that children must be educated in the regular school system, and that they must have access, the same access to an education that everyone else has, and that education must take place in the student's least restrictive environment. So you will hear this acronym thrown around sometimes, LRE, and it means least restrictive environment. And there is a continuum of placements for children. It would start at general education. That would be the the least restrictive environment possible at a school system. General education with everything taking place in the general education classroom. And then moving along the continuum to a classroom that would be completely self-contained and would contain only children with special needs with a special needs teacher. And we will talk about that more later with advocacy tips. Okay. So we'll talk about the Individualized Education Program, the IEP. Sometimes it's referred to as the Individualized Education Plan. So if you hear that, it's the exact same thing. And it's the legal document that describes in detail how your child's special education will be implemented. So it's going to be different from every child's IEP is going to be different. It's going to be unique, and it's going to be tailored to their specific needs. And the school needs to provide the services and supports that are laid out in the document. So it's legal and binding, and they're required to provide what is in the IEP. Okay. So who makes the IEP? Well, the IEP team. It's a team decision. It is not one person or two people who make this decision. It is an entire team of people. And the parent is an essential part of that team. They must be invited. Every effort must be made to have the parent attend the session, to have the ability to attend if they would like. There needs to be a representative of the school that can make decisions on the school end. There needs to be a general education teacher who can give input into general education requirements. And then service providers, such as special education teacher, a speech and language pathologist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, school social worker, and others. There can also be, the student can come if desired. I know my son started coming when he was 12 years old, coming to his own IEP for the very beginning of the IEP. And he just sat down and talked about what he was worried about going to middle school, what he was concerned about, what kind of things, what kind of supports he felt he needed. And his input was, it was taken into consideration when we made the IEP. School psychologist is oftentimes invited. You can invite a physician or an advocate or anyone who has special knowledge about your child. So you are able to invite people as well as the school. I have an advocacy tip here. When surrounded by a team of professionals, it is easy to feel intimidated. So it might be you and an entire room of professionals, and that can feel intimidating. I know that it certainly has felt that way for myself. And you need to remember and kind of constantly remind yourself that you're your child's best advocate and that you are a full member of the IEP team. You're not in any way subpar for the IEP team. You are a full member and you know your child better than anyone else. Are there any questions at this point in time? No? Okay. So we'll talk about the parts of the IEP. What does the IEP look like? Well, it's going to look different in every school district. So school districts are able to make their own IEP templates, but they need to have the same parts. They need to include the same legal documentation. So an advocacy tip that I have for you is to ask for a copy of the draft of the IEP prior to the meeting. So you will be able to take some time, usually a day or two. They won't usually provide it too far in advance because they're still preparing the document. But if you ask, they'll usually provide you with it with a little bit of preparation time so that you can review the document and prepare questions in advance. And it's your copy, so you can write all over it. You can ask questions, you can highlight anything that you want to know about the IEP. Prepare in advance if you can. And remember that anything that is written in this draft can be changed. So just because it's written in a draft does not mean that it needs to go in the actual IEP. So the first part of the IEP is the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, which is a long term known as the PLAF. So the PLAF is the foundation of the IEP. It's the first part that describes exactly how your child is performing at present. So it's going to say exactly what needs your child has and exactly where they're performing. The entire IEP is based on the PLAF. So if you're going to advocate for something for your child, so let's say you want more speech services, this would be where you would advocate for that. You would say, my child is performing at this level. And that is the basis for getting more service time. You should contribute to the PLAF. You should contribute in writing if possible, and prior if possible. So when you get the IEP invite, then you can say, how can I submit my input? I'd like to put some input into the IEP, and that's your legal right. So they would have to say yes, and you are able to write anything in the PLAF that you feel is applicable to your child. So describing your child's strengths and weaknesses in detail, and anything that you provide, the information you provide, it needs to be addressed. Okay, and I see that there's a question. Let me see. If you need assistance in an IEP meeting, who is the first professional to help? How do you hire them? There are advocacy organizations, and we will be talking about those later on. There are parent mentors who are really helpful, and then there are professional advocates that you can hire, but we'll be talking about that a little farther on. Thank you.
Candace, can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin. I'm the clinical director at A2 Therapy Works and also a speech language pathologist myself. I know that sometimes we have also attended IEP meetings in order to comment on what it is that the student is working on in private therapy as well. So that is also always an option if your child is receiving private therapy, be it for speech language therapy, occupational therapy, ABA therapy, mental health professional. Any one of those can come. Each person that you go to is going to have different ways that they engage with that. So some places might ask you to charge a fee for the time. Other people might do it just free of charge on their own time. So just ask the professionals who you're working with outside of school. A lot of them are really, really happy to help and like to attend that sort of thing because it really helps with communication between the child's entire team so that way everybody can work together. So that's always another professional who can come as well. Thanks, Candace.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, this is a good question that I mentioned, coming to a meeting and then seeing the draft ahead of time. So the school does draft it ahead of time. The meeting is supposed to be more than just finalizing it though. The meeting is a discussion and the draft is something that leads that discussion. but it's more than finalizing it. It is, it's just the basis of the discussion. And I don't know anything in particular about Rossonville Elementary School. Are there grants for private therapy? There are. Is anybody else from A2 Therapy Works able to describe those?
I can talk a little bit. I've had families that have applied before, so I believe I have a list. If not, I can find it somewhere. So if anybody would like to drop their email in the chat, I can write that down and send a list of some of the grants that I've found before. I'm not an expert on it, but I know that a lot of it depends on income. So they have you submit like your W-2 form or something to show income. And then a lot of it times you have to have a report from either an SLP if that's what you're requesting, or whatever the professional services that you're looking for, a letter from them or a report. And then usually your doctor also submits a letter. So all of them have different processes, but yes, if you drop your email, I will make a list and I will look for that document because I have created one before.
Thank you, Sydney. Okay, so moving on, after you have the basis of the IEP, after you have the PLAF, then you can make annual goals. So we know the student's needs. What do we need to do to get that child to make that progress that shows that they are making they're working towards their maximum potential? So annual goals reflect a year's worth of progress. So a lot of times they'll be broken down into what they'll work on at a few months at a time, so that they're more manageable. But the full goal is an annual goal, what they will be doing in 1 year. And a goal should be SMART. It's a little acronym that stands for specific, measurable, action words, realistic and relevant, and time limited. So specific would mean that it says exactly what the child is going to do. Measurable means that there's some kind of wording in there that tells you exactly what they're going to, how they're going to say whether this goal is met or not. Action words saying what the child is going to do specifically. Realistic and relevant. So is this goal going to help the child to perform? Or is this a goal that's not going to be relevant to the child's education? And then time limited. So what is the specific time limit for this goal? An example of a SMART goal is at the end of the first semester, Mark will touch type a passage or a text at a speed of 20 words per minute with no more than 10 errors, with the progress measured on a 5-minute timed text. So that is a really good SMART goal that has all of the parts in it. And it can be hard as a parent to really know whether the goal is SMART or not, but I would look for 2 things in particular. I would look that the goal is specific and that the goal is relevant to your child. Okay. Secondary transition considerations is another part of the IEP that comes after the goals usually. And this part of the IEP needs to be filled out by age 16. So the IEP needs to address the post-secondary transition planning, the goals of the child after high school. And how will the child be able to reach those goals? This can begin much earlier. So my son is 13 right now, and we talked about it for the first time at his IEP when he was 13. And we talked about how his goal is to graduate high school, and his goal is to get a job. And we weren't quite sure what kind of job that would be. So that's something, that's the planning that'll take place between now and age 16. So by the time he's 16, he will have a specific plan for the future written out. An advocacy tip is that IEPs are required to be reviewed and updated annually, but parents can request a new IEP at any time. So if something is not working in your IEP, then call another meeting. Let someone know. There's no reason for someone to have an entire year go by where that IEP is not, it's not effective, it's not making a difference for the child. So in addition, you can request that the IEP includes regular team meetings. So that is a really good tip. So it would be one of the things outlined in the IEP that the child needs to receive team meetings, maybe 3 team meetings a year, or you could say a team meeting within the first 2 months of school, something like that, to review the effectiveness of the plan for that particular school year. Are there any questions before we move on? Okay. So the next section of the IEP is the supplementary aids and services. And that is the necessary accommodations and supports and when those are provided. So these are going to be specific to your child. Extended time for tests. Adult support is in this section, that's a big one. And assistive technology is another area that can be addressed in the supports and services. When you have the supports and services written in your IEP, make sure that it doesn't say as necessary. That's a term that just doesn't mean very much, and it can lead to inconsistent implementation. So instead of use of a planner when needed, you could say use of a planner in general education classes or during math instruction or something like that, so that you know that that support is being provided consistently. The next section is about assessments, participation and provisions. Will the student participate in state and/or district-wide standardized testing? So it's not foregone that the student has to participate. It is an IEP decision, an IEP team decision. And then if the student does participate in those district-wide or statewide standardized testing, what kind of accommodations do they need? Next section is special education services and programs. And this is going to be the part that sometimes you're waiting for with bated breath. What are they going to say? What are they going to provide? What is the school going to give in the way of services? And this is the time when they would say things such as speech services, 30 minutes twice a week. All right, and it would outline exactly how much time and how often those services would take place. Sometimes they write so many minutes, so many times a month. Sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's daily. So the way that they write it is not really important as long as you divide it out and decide that it is appropriate. It tells where those services will take place. So there are 3 different ways that services can take place. They can be push-in, so that would be in the classroom. So wherever the child is, the services come to the child. The speech language pathologist comes into the classroom and works with the student. Pull-out services happen when they take the child to a resource room or to the speech room, something like that, and work on goals in a small group or one-on-one. And then a combination of those 2 is very common. This is the part that will detail the special education services and programs, will detail your child's least restrictive educational placement. So right here is where it will say how much time your child will spend in general education and how much time your child will spend in special education. And they'll write that out specifically in minutes. Talking about the least restrictive environment, I was saying before that there is a continuum of services that begins with the general education classroom. So that's where discussions about IEPs needs to begin. Sometimes it will begin at a different place. They will say, well, we'll just continue doing what we've been doing. Well, we need to start at the least restrictive environment, with the general education classroom. And if the general education classroom is not brought up, don't hesitate to bring it up. You should ask, if general education is not appropriate, why is it not appropriate specifically? And are there any supports or services that we can provide for the child to make that appropriate? So an example of that could be adult support. Adult support could help a child to be able to access that general education classroom. Are there any questions? No? Okay. All right. ESY is extended school year, and the IEP has to talk about the extended school year. Sometimes this discussion is tabled until the end of the school year, and they talk about it in May, April, May, when they make the decisions. But they have to at least say that it's been discussed. And extended school year is appropriate in three options, three different ways. If there was regression, if there was regression during school breaks that cannot be recouped in a reasonable amount of time, if the child's disability is of a severe nature, that sometimes they qualify for ESY, or if they are in a critical point in learning. So let's say your child just got a device to help them to talk. Well, that would be the perfect time to bring in the extended school year and have that child continue learning to use that device during the summer. My final advocacy tip is don't rush the IEP. So sometimes they'll say we have an hour to do this IEP. Well, an hour today. If we need to do it, and if we need to continue another day, that's fine. So it's always your right as a parent to say, let's just reconvene at another day. So don't feel pressured to make decisions that you need time to think about. And another topic that's kind of a hot topic right now is IEPs during COVID. Are they still being provided? Well, each school district is addressing this a little bit differently, but they are still required to provide a free and appropriate public education to all children. Nothing has been waived at the federal level. None of the protections that guide IEPs have been waived. So they must implement the IEP with a good faith effort. So that can mean some different things. So the Michigan Department of Education has issued guidance on what good faith effort means during this distance learning time. And when certain supports and services are not practical to implement, then districts are advised, they don't have to, but they're advised to write a contingency learning plan. And that could outline how a child is going to receive certain services that just don't work in a virtual environment. I heard an example is cutting. If you're learning how to use scissors, it might be really difficult to teach that in a virtual environment. And for that kind of thing, they might have a contingency learning plan. But the contingency learning plan does not replace the IEP. The IEP is still it's still completely valid, and it's still completely the legal document guiding your child's education. Within the contingency learning plans, you are still your child's advocate, and you can make sure that you feel that it is appropriate for your child. So it might take more advocacy to be able to get a contingency learning plan that is appropriate. So where do you turn to for help? There are a few different places that are awesome. The first is the Disability Rights Michigan, and The Disability Rights Michigan has just changed their name from Michigan Protection and Advocacy Services. So you might have heard of it as that, but it is a state required agency that has lawyers and advocates. So you can call and get your question answered by a lawyer if you have a question about the law. And they do take on cases pro bono for areas that are in need. Things like just severe exclusions of children from special education is what they generally take on. There's also the Michigan Alliance for Families. And with that, you can call this number or go to this website and speak with a local parent mentor. So each of the parent mentors has a few different counties that they specialize in. And you can go to this website or call them and talk to someone who will know about your school district generally. They're wonderful. And then my last advocacy resource is to look into your Parent Advisory Committee for Special Education. It's referred to as the PAC. Large school districts such as Ann Arbor have their own PAC, but all districts have one at the ISD. So that is your intermediate school district. So it's kind of the overarching organization that oversees the school districts in a county. So you can contact your special education department in your district to locate your PAC. And I highly recommend that. A lot of PACs have Facebook pages that are wonderful. They have meetings, they have speakers, and they have parents who rely on each other for help and support. So I know that in my experience, the PAC has been very helpful for me. These are my references. And if you have any questions, we can talk about them right now for a little bit. And you're welcome to call the A2 Therapy Works Clinic or email me at CandaceKakowski@a2therapyworks.com. So,
Hi, Candace. This is Vanessa, Levi's mom.
yes.
I just want to know, does an IEP transfer to a private school?
Private schools are not required to provide IEPs because they get private funding. So they're not required to do that. However, they oftentimes will have a public service plan. So service providers such as a speech teacher or an occupational therapist might go to that private school and service your child at that private school. So it's a separate plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And oh, sorry, with regards to the advocacy, we had advocacy last year, and then we barely used a few hours, maybe 3 hours out of 30 hours.
Oh, okay.
And I had no idea that it expires at the end of the school year. So then I found out today that it was expired and we can no longer use it for this year. And we've paid for the entire year.
Okay.
Do you guys know if that's what I'm told, but do you guys know if that's really what happens, or it depends on the agency?
So that would be the regulations of a specific advocacy organization. So I don't know what the rules are for that, but I do know that there are the free options that I mentioned. The Disability Rights of Michigan might be the first place you'd go if you think that you might need law help, and if you think that you might need just to talk to a local parent mentor. The Michigan Alliance for Families is excellent. But I don't know about the regulations for a specific advocacy organization.
Okay, thank you very much, Candace.
Hi, I'm Nicole and I have a question.
Yes.
My son has an IEP and he's had an IEP for several years now and he's 6.
Mhm.
And when we went through COVID in March, since we didn't know what the next year, this school year would look like,
Mhm.
there was no way I could ask for certain things to be included as a part of his IEP. And so now he's going to school virtually, which we might change, and that his support includes like 6 other kids. So
Okay.
when he had one-on-one support before, or maybe he might have been paired with someone with his same need for growth. Now he's being grouped into 6 kids and services aren't being dispensed as they were last year. So would it be suggested that I revisit the IEP, because they're telling me now there's no way that he can get the minutes that that are on his IEP?
Okay.
That there's no way. And I'm in West Bloomfield and they're telling me straight out that they're not going to do it.
Okay.
And you said the federal guideline had not been waived
No, it has not.
due to COVID.
You still have to receive the free and appropriate public education. So I would revisit the IEP at that point in time. Yeah.
So request to revisit. And I was the person who asked the question about needing a parent mentor or someone who I could either solicit or pay to be a part of that IEP. Would I factor in maybe his, he has a doctor that gave him his autism diagnosis, and he has a regular pediatrician as well. And
And a lot of times physicians can put their input in writing, and that can be really helpful.
okay.
Yeah. To have an expert opinion.
Okay. And what about, I think it was, I forgot the previous slide you had, but it had the Disability of Michigan, and it had another number on there.
Yes, Disability Rights Michigan.
I'm just writing down some
Yes.
information. And the Michigan Alliance for Families, that's different than the autism one, right?
It is.
Okay. I just need to, here, I think I'm gonna try and do a screenshot, but Michigan Alliance. So ask for the IEP to be revisited for maybe even one-on-one. And if they tell me that they're unable to provide that, and I get a doctor to document that this is what my son should have, what if the school district says they just don't have the ability to do it?
You know, that's the point where I would get an advocate.
From the Michigan Alliance for Families?
They would be able to get you in contact with an advocate, yes.
Okay,
Yes,
or
yes,
do you think there's a PAC in my area?
There probably is a PAC. There has to be a PAC at your intermediate school district. So there are parents who help each other for your school district.
Okay, I'll continue to look for that.
And I would always start with talking to your teacher, and then talk to the principal, talk to the special education department, keep going up until you get your answers. That seems to be the best way that I've advocated for my children.
I've had trouble getting, and I've been able to get in front of a couple of people, but it is, you know, the systems in place are barely working now, so that's people are stretched pretty thin.
you know, that's true. That's a reality. But just because that's a reality doesn't mean that your child shouldn't get what they need. So that's the way that I've looked at it for my children.
I have a question, if the final one is finished.
Yes.
I have a question about goals, the child's goals in the IEP, because it's occurred to me, you had a slide about it being realistic.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if there's ever a situation where you have a goal that is really like, you know, ideal, that we'd like the kid to be able to do this. But if you as a parent are kind of wondering, is this possible? Could that ever be, the lack of meeting a goal ever be used as kind of a reason why the child has to be moved from general education into a, you know, self-contained or other services? Is this something you've come across?
Yes, you know, lack of progress towards goals is one of the reasons why they might move to a more restrictive environment, or why they would preferably add more supports and services. But if you feel that a goal is not realistic, it to be achieved in a year, then I would talk about that, and I would bring it up. And also at any point during the year, an IEP can be reconvened, or it can be amended with just a little part changed. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a question. I'm Brian Van Bell. I'm Oliver's father.
Hi.
You know, we've had IEPs for a number of years, and you know, up until this past year, we've done pretty well, and we're probably lulled to sleep a little bit, unfortunately. And based on the outcome of last year, we're not necessarily certain that the school is following his IEP, but we have no means of documentation or anything that was provided that would tell us that he was actually receiving all his services, given the times per week and the frequency per week. Is there anything that we could have the IEP updated or request, such that we can know with some level of certainty that he's actually receiving what the legal IEP document is telling us that he's supposed to get?
Yes, you have access. You have the right to access your child's educational records, and the service record, the notes that the service provider writes afterwards, and the documentation that they did certain number of minutes at different days, has to be provided to you if you ask for it.
Okay.
It might take a little while to get. So it may be a document might have several children's name on it or something like that, and they might need to parse that out and just have your child's information on it. So it might take a little while, but they have to provide that to you if you ask.
Okay.
I have a question. We just requested an IEP meeting because we wanted to amend it. Is it out of the question to ask, Oliver, baby, is it out of the question to ask that they provide us with that information, say monthly or at the end of each week, the notes from each session?
You could put it, I would say monthly would be good.
Monthly, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe this might help some other parents. We've been in contact with his school since pretty much March of last year, trying to get an IEP set up and unfortunately amended. And, you know, they switched principals, and then there was all sorts of other issues. But,
well, and COVID.
and COVID, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, at least from our experience this past 5 or 6 months, is if the school's not responding to you, work your way up the chain.
Yes.
Yeah, we emailed the director of special education directly, and we got an email right away from the principal. So that can definitely help.
And
Yes.
then a lot of our children can't communicate with us very well, and that's something we learned last year.
Yeah.
Prior to last year, all the schools and teachers we worked with were very good about communicating with us about what's going on with our child.
What happened during the day?
Last year, every attempt we've made to set up some level of communication with the teacher, whether it's a notebook in his book bag or, you know, his parapro to tell us what's going on, Nobody seemed to want to communicate with us last year, which has led to a bunch of issues. So one of the things that we're trying to amend his IEP with is the frequency and how the teachers, the resource room teacher, the
Gender.
therapist are all supposed to communicate with us. The frequency and how they're going to do that.
That's excellent. That's an excellent idea.
So that might be something that other families might want to consider before they run into what we ran into last year.
Yeah.
So beyond that, thank you for having
Yeah,
this.
thank
It's
you.
certainly helpful.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hi, Candace. This is Kristen. Kristen.
Oh, hi, Kristen.
So I had a question on if you submit comments for the PLAF.
Yes.
Are they so that you could then have goals towards the things that you're looking at? Are they required then to address that?
Yes. And they're supposed to put that in word for word. So they're not supposed to edit that at all. It's just supposed to be copied and pasted into the IEP, and then they have to address it.
Okay, so like if his therapist wrote in, because we've been trying to get this in for a couple years, tried to put in for like communication with his team, how they communicate with him, they could put that in the PLAF, and then they would have to have a goal.
Well, they would have to talk about it.
Talk about it.
They
Okay.
don't have to have a goal for it.
Okay.
But at the very end, there is a section for options discussed and why they were not, why they were chosen or not chosen. So if they say that they will not provide this, then they need to document in the IEP why they will not provide it.
Okay. Okay. And then my other question was sort of along the lines of somebody else, for the good faith plans, or kind of the providing FAPE under the IEP right now. The MDE, they did say that they do have to provide FAPE under that.
Yes.
Under the good faith plan. So do you know what that is? So, if he has a one-to-one, do they need to still somehow provide whatever his one-to-one is doing, figure out how they can best do that to provide him so that he can access the curriculum?
Yeah, they need to provide adult support. I don't know that it'll look exactly the same as it did, but if adult support is written in the IEP, and that's an essential part of it, then they need to provide that.
They need to figure out how to provide it. Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
And then in the comments, Beth from the Special Education Mediation Services mentioned that she has a free service that helps families work through conflicts. Families and schools work through conflicts. They facilitated IEP meetings and provide mediation services. So they're not advocates, but they're mediators. And she has her information there. So thank you, Beth. Yes, the Student Advocacy Center is another great resource there, located in Atlanta. And yes, a lot of times they on expulsions, suspensions and expulsions. I know they specialize in that. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I would like to thank everyone for coming. This is the first time that we've done this, and I'm so glad to see such a great turnout and to have so many questions and participants. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone so much for coming. We love that we're able to create these opportunities for families and to give you all an opportunity to talk with one another as well, because I think it's so nice to have that supportive community, kind of like Candace was talking about earlier on. So again, like she said, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to call the office, email Candace. We're happy to help in whatever way we can. And then if we aren't able to, we're happy to point you in the direction of somebody who might be able to. So yep, there's our phone number and Candace's email. If nobody has any other questions, we're gonna sign off for now. If you guys do have any last minute questions that you wanna type in the chat box, we can always respond to those via email as well. Otherwise, that's all we've got. Candace, you don't have anything else, right?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you everybody so much for coming. Have a great night.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. You can wait. Can you not wait? Exactly right now. Can you say hi?
Hi, Levi.
Hi, Levi. Nice job waiting, but that was hard, wasn't it? Yeah, I believe it.
Oh, boy.
All right.
Hi.
Hi, Tammy.
Hi. All right. I just want to say, like, I'm new here in Michigan, so was all good information. But it's also similar to Florida, like the IEP.
Mm-hmm.
The way it's set up, the only difference is, like you mentioned about 26 years old.
Yes,
Okay, it's extended. That's the only different.
it is extended from age 21 to 26. So if you would not be able to graduate from a traditional high school and might need to go to a young adult program, Michigan offers that.
Okay. And is there any camps, like for winter camp, spring and summer camp for special needs?
Not provided in the IEP. The only thing provided in the IEP would be extended school year, if they would qualify for that.
Okay, what about anything outside of that? Do you know?
I don't know of any, yeah, I'm not
you
sure
know-
of any camps or anything. Candace, are you?
No, I don't know about camps, but they are required to provide help with extracurriculars. For example, my son ran track and needed to have a parapro with him to run track. So I know that they do provide things through the IEP for extracurriculars. So if there was a camp run through the school district, like the recreational education, they might provide support. Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.